Let's get the reaction of Professor Scott Lucas from the Department of International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Professor Lucas, I ask you, hence the same question. What's stopping Tehran from capitulating, as he says, Steve Witkoff? It's under economic strain, facing protests and staring at major U.S. military buildup. So why hasn't it blinked?
Let me ask you and your viewers, if a foreign power put warships and fighter jets off the coast of Saudi Arabia, if they said to you, unless you give up your energy programs and your domestic autonomy, we will bomb you, would you capitulate? And I think the answer for the Saudi royal family would probably be no. So why the real estate developer Steve Witkoff, who's also Donald Trump's envoy, would think that the Iranian regime would simply surrender and not even try to negotiate on terms that meant it could retain a civil nuclear program, it's beyond me. I think it was a very clumsy way of admitting what we all know, and that is that the U.S. has put this force off the coast of Iran. At the same time, the talks are going on to tell the Iranians, give us what we want, which at this point appears to be zero enrichment, appears to be also discussion of Iran's ballistic missile program, without any commitments on sanctions removal. Give us what we want, or we're going to go to war with you. And the Iranian regime has been under a great deal of pressure. It's been under economic pressure for years. It has faced military challenges for decades, including its rivalry with Israel and at times the Gulf states. And it now has serious domestic issues with Iranians who want rights and reforms, but it's still a regime that is relatively intact. It's not like the military and other groups are splitting away from the supreme leader. So I think the Trump camp, while they have all this force assembled off the coast of Iran, really are at a loss where they want to go next.
And Professor Lucas, after a deadly January crackdown, we've seen students are back on the streets over the weekend. What do these demonstrations tell us about the state of public sentiment in Iran today?
Well, I think it tells us what I've long heard from friends inside Iran, and I'm privileged to have many of them, which is the idea of fire under the ashes, that they do want change. Whether that's reforms, whether that's actually a replacement of the regime. They want more political, social space. They want to be able to live without intimidation, without the fear of being arrested or killed. And despite the regime killing thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Iranians last month, people will still make this known. Now, I must emphasize at this point that these, unlike the protests that started in late December, which started in the markets and in the bazaars, these look like they're just at the university campuses for the moment. It doesn't look like we've got a widespread movement across all sectors of Iranian society like we did have last month. But it is a symptom that Iran is never a case where the opposition is in a place to get rid of the regime, but it's never in a place where the regime has completely put down the Iranian wish to try to have respect for their rights and for justice.
And with the 40-day mourning period over protests that are gathering momentum and U.S. forces that we see massing up in the region, does the government, you think, Professor Lucas, will it double down on repression, or do you think it'll act more carefully now?
Well, I think the regime made it very clear last month, specifically on January 8th and 9th, after the late son of the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, had called for protest on the streets because he would like to return to power. The regime made clear it's not going to tolerate widespread protest, and it will unleash military force to put this down. No one should be under any illusion of that. At the same time, I think the idea that a U.S. attack on the regime would open up the way for the protesters is badly misguided, because as soon as the U.S. attacks, the regime will try to rally support by going to Iranians and saying, look, we're not your enemy. The US and Israel are. We saw that during Israel's 12-day war last June, when the regime was able to command support and push back protests. And I think if the Trump camp were foolish enough to go in with widespread airstrikes, it will actually undercut those Iranian protests.
And continuing on the topic of protests, how might these renewed protests inside Iran actually influence the government's willingness to negotiate or not with the U.S.?
Well, right now, the Iranian regime is just trying to buy time. They do not want to be attacked by the United States. They do not want to face a case where the mass protests put them under threat of being removed. So they're going to say, look, we'll talk, we'll negotiate. That's what was repeated by the foreign ministry today. That's why we have an announcement of another round of talks, which I believe are going to be in the Gulf. How much time can the Iranian regime buy? Not only versus the United States, but versus its own people. I think you go back to the fundamental factor that triggered the mass protest in December, and that's the Iranian economy. Given the plummeting currency, given the high rate of inflation, given the collapses of key banks in Iran, given the mismanagement of the economy, I think if you have another shock, another economic shock that affects many Iranians, that's what will really spur the protest, even with the threat of repression.
And Iran and the U.S. will meet for another round, as we've been reporting, of talks on Thursday again. So what do you think, Professor Lucas? Do you think there will be a deal, or do you think we're closer to peaceful resolution, perhaps? Or do you think we're closer to a broader conflict?
Right now, we're in a limbo. We've had talks about talks. That's what we've had so far. Whether or not we have got a defined agenda, that's something I'll be looking for on Thursday. Whether that agenda gets to the heart of issues around nuclear enrichment, around whether or not Iran's ballistic missile program will be discussed, and around verification through the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as the issue of sanctions. Let's see if those are on the table. I think the Iranians would like to put those on the table. I think they do want to find a way out of this. Is the Trump administration actually going to be willing to come off of the position of zero enrichment? Are they going to insist that Iran has to give up its ballistic missile program or limit it? Because if they do either of those, these talks will go nowhere.
It looks like in any negotiation, someone's going to have to compromise, right? Thank you, Professor Scott Lucas, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank your viewers.
Hi, I'm Scott Lucas. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, subscribe, spread the word, send ideas.